Walk into a working kitchen in Goshen, Indiana. No canola, no soybean, no vegetable blend. The family cooking here has used the same 3 fats for 200 years, and not one of them costs more than $6. After the last video, I kept coming back to the same question. If God's people never struggled with weight, what were they actually cooking with? So I went to the original source. Not a study, not a podcast. Leviticus, in Hebrew, with a concordance. And what I found goes back not 100 years, but 3,000 years. Before this video ends, I will show you the 3 fats Leviticus sets apart, how to source each for under $6, and a method unchanged for 3,000 years. I will also show you a 1958 University of Minnesota study that shaped every USDA guideline by 1980. Not proven at scale, not replicated, just quietly adopted. And I am going to tell you who pushed it and why. This is a $6 solution to a problem a $90 billion industry has spent 40 years pretending to solve. Here is a number that should make you angry. In 1960, the adult obesity rate in America was 13.4%. The USDA issued its first official dietary guidelines in 1980, guidelines built almost entirely on that 1958 University of Minnesota study. By 2022, the CDC measured the adult obesity rate at 41.9%. That is a 213% increase. In the same 4 decades, the American vegetable oil industry grew from a regional product into an annual market worth $31.7 billion. The average American now consumes 53 pounds of seed and vegetable oils every single year. In 1909, that number was less than 3 pounds. Not a coincidence. A straight line from the day the guidelines changed to the day the weight charts broke. Here is how the mainstream system actually works. A seed oil like canola or soybean does not press out the way olive oil presses out. It requires chemical solvents, usually hexane, the same compound found in paint thinner, to extract fat from a seed that contains almost no naturally occurring oil. That oil is then bleached, deodorized, and heat stabilized at temperatures above 450 degrees Fahrenheit before it reaches your grocery shelf. What comes out is clear, odorless, and engineered to sit in a plastic bottle for 2 years. It was never designed to nourish you. It was designed to be purchased again. Here is what God's people already understood. Olive oil cold presses out of a ripe olive below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. No heat required. You can feel the oil on your hands within seconds of touching a ripe olive, warm, dense, faintly golden. Tallow renders out of beef fat at barely 200 degrees Fahrenheit. No hexane, no bleaching, no factory. Ghee separates from butter in a single pot over a fire you could build in a field. These fats are structurally stable at cooking temperatures. They do not break down and oxidize the way a polyunsaturated fat breaks down when it hits a hot pan. A child with a stone press and a fire could produce every single one of them from scratch. God's people did not read about this in a nutritional textbook. They did not wait for a government committee to tell them what to eat. They understood it the way the ancients understood everything, by paying attention to what the earth, the olive, and the animal were already providing, and then building their entire table around it. The committee came 3,000 years later, and it got it wrong. But here is where it gets interesting. The Israelites pressed olive oil from cultivated groves more than 5,000 years ago. Archaeological evidence from sites across northern Israel shows olive oil production facilities dating to 2,500 BC, including stone presses, collection vats, and storage jars. The ancient Greeks refined the cold press method and spread olive cultivation across the entire Mediterranean basin. By 600 BC, Athens had made olive oil its primary export, the crop so valued that the lawmaker Solon banned the export of every agricultural product except olive oil. The Romans then built the largest olive oil distribution network the ancient world had ever seen. Production was across what is now Spain, Tunisia, and Greece, and oil was shipped to every corner of the empire. By the time Paul wrote his letters from Rome, olive oil was no longer a luxury product. It was infrastructure. Food, fuel, medicine, and worship, all pressed from the same fruit. God's people brought those same fats, olive oil, rendered animal fats, and clarified butter into the early American settlements. The Mennonite and Amish communities of Indiana and Ohio were still cooking with lard and tallow well into the 1940s. Their cookbooks referenced no vegetable oil. Their kitchens held no factory-made shortening. The fat came from the animal they raised, the olive they pressed, or the butter they churned. The same fats their ancestors in the Old World had used for 100 generations before them. Then, in 1911, Procter & Gamble introduced a product called Crisco in Cincinnati, Ohio. Crisco was not butter. It was not lard. It was cottonseed oil, partially hydrogenated in a process patented 2 years earlier in Europe. It was white, solid, and shelf-stable for 2 years. By 1913, Procter & Gamble had printed 2.5 million copies of a cookbook called The Story of Crisco and distributed them free to churches, cooking schools, and grocery stores across America. The book contained 615 recipes, every one of them replacing lard or butter with Crisco. One company, one cookbook, 2.5 million households. By the 1940s, wartime butter rationing had pushed margarine into American kitchens. Animal fats were framed as scarce, expensive, and old-fashioned. Vegetable oils were modern, scientific, and progressive. The language of industrial food had replaced the language of the land. Then, in 1961, the American Heart Association issued a dietary statement recommending that Americans replace saturated fat with polyunsaturated vegetable oils to reduce cardiovascular risk. The lead scientific voice behind that recommendation was Ancel Keys of the University of Minnesota, the same man behind the 1958 study. Keys had access to dietary data from 22 countries. He published findings from 6. The countries that did not fit his hypothesis were not included in his final analysis. This was a selective analysis. In 1977, the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition released the McGovern Report. It told 220 million Americans to decrease saturated fat, decrease cholesterol, and increase carbohydrates and vegetable oils. The report told people to decrease consumption of meat and butter fat. 7 words, 1 federal report, and 4,000 years of God's people cooking with olive oil, tallow, and clarified butter disappeared from the American kitchen in a single decade. It was not an accident. In 2022, the food processing and vegetable oil industry spent $32.7 million on federal lobbying. The edible oils market in America is worth $31.7 billion a year. The average American household buys commercial cooking oil 11 times a year. Every jar of tallow rendered from a butcher's trim is a jar never sold. Every batch of ghee clarified at home is a margin never collected. Every bottle of pressed olive oil is a contract never signed. In 2020, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, the 20-person federal panel responsible for shaping what 330 million Americans are told to eat, released its recommendations. Researchers found that 19 of the 20 members had documented financial ties to the food and beverage industry. 19 of 20. The committee that decides your diet was built almost entirely from people paid by the companies that profit from your diet. The foxes wrote the rules for the hen house, and the hens never knew. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, the results were already in. In 2013, The New England Journal of Medicine published the pre-dimed trial, a Spanish study tracking 7,447 participants over 4.8 years. The group assigned a Mediterranean diet with extra virgin olive oil saw a 30% reduction in major cardiovascular events. The study was stopped early because withholding the olive oil diet from the control group was considered unethical. Not a marginal result, 30%. In 1999, the Lyon Diet Heart Study tracked 605 heart attack survivors in France. The group on a Mediterranean-style diet saw cardiac deaths drop 72% over 4 years. 72%. Your doctor has never put those two studies in front of you. Your dietitian's handout still says to limit saturated fat and choose vegetable oils. But the data does not care what the handout says. Now, if you already have a kitchen and you are thinking this only applies to people who grew up on a farm, or people with access to livestock, or people who have spent years learning traditional cooking methods from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You do not need to tear out your pantry or throw away everything in your refrigerator. You do not need a homestead, a farm, or an acre of land. You do not need a permit, a special license, or anyone's approval. You do not need to spend more than $12 to start. You need a heavy-bottomed pot, a fine mesh strainer, and a mason jar. Even if you live in a one-bedroom apartment in the middle of a city. Even if you have never rendered a gram of fat in your life and have no idea what suet is. Even if you have been cooking with canola oil for 30 years and your pantry is full of the exact products this video is about. It does not matter. The method is the same, the cost is the same, and the result is the same. Here is exactly what you do. You start with extra virgin olive oil. Harvest date on the label, within the last 12 months. Not a best by date. A harvest date. Cost $8.99 to $14.99 per liter. Undated bottles can be 3 years old before they reach your shelf. What comes out of a dated bottle is cold-pressed fat from a fruit. No solvents, no bleaching. Use it below 375 degrees Fahrenheit. You render tallow from beef kidney suet. $1.50 to $4 per pound from a butcher. Cut into 1-inch pieces. Low heat, 200 to 225 degrees, 3 to 4 hours. Do not use trim fat or ground beef fat. It renders cloudy and goes rancid faster. Kidney suet only. Strain through cheesecloth into a mason jar. Shelf stable for 12 months. No hexane, no factory. You make GHE from 1 pound of unsalted butter. Lowest heat setting, 20 to 25 minutes. Skim the foam. Strain into a jar. The smoke point is 485 degrees Fahrenheit. Higher than canola. Higher than any standard vegetable oil on a grocery shelf. Cost $4 to $7 per batch. A man outside Goshen, Indiana. Standard kitchen, no farm, no special equipment. Before the switch, he was spending $47 a week on cooking oil and processed food. In January 2023, he switched to these 3 fats. He did not count a single calorie. He did not change his exercise. He lost 27 pounds in 6 months. He called it the first time food felt like food again. Stay with me. Before I show you the 4th fat, the one no dietary guideline has ever named, if you are not subscribed yet, do it now. Because what comes next is the part the seed oil industry has spent 60 years making sure you never find. And I am not going to make it easy to miss. Here is the honesty. You will not hear this from anyone selling you a supplement or a fat loss program. For the 3 fats I just showed you, olive oil, tallow, and ghee, most households in most climates will never run into a problem. They cover salads, medium heat cooking, high heat searing, and baking. But there is one situation where all 3 fall short. When you need a finishing fat with a flavor profile that does not come from an olive grove or a cattle farm. When the dish calls for something lighter, nuttier, with a different kind of depth. For that, there is a 4th fat. It is the one the ancient Near East used for 5,500 years before anyone had heard of canola oil. And it is the one no dietary guideline has ever named. Sesame. Not the toasted sesame oil in a small bottle on the Asian foods aisle. The cold-pressed, unrefined sesame oil that has been a staple fat from ancient Assyria to ancient Egypt to the Indus Valley civilization. Archaeological evidence places sesame cultivation in the Harappan civilization as early as 2600 BC. A jar of sesame oil was recovered from the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1323 BC. Ancient Assyrian texts, dating to the 7th century BC, record sesame oil as a cooking staple across the Mesopotamian region. The same region where the patriarchs lived, the same trade routes the ancient Israelites walked. Instead of finishing a dish with vegetable oil, finish it with a single teaspoon of cold-pressed sesame oil. Sesame oil contains two compounds, sesamol and sesamin, that function as natural antioxidants and slow oxidation at the cellular level. No heat required, no factory processing, no refined seed oil. Here is what makes this version practical from a sourcing and budget standpoint. Cold-pressed sesame oil uses standard cold press equipment. It qualifies as a whole food under any existing nutritional classification. No special permit, no health claim regulation, no confused nutritionist. A 16-ounce bottle runs between $9 and $16 at any natural grocery store. You use it in teaspoon amounts as a finishing oil. One bottle lasts 60 to 90 days. And here is what the research shows. A 2016 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Clinical Biochemistry and Nutrition reviewed 17 randomized controlled trials on sesame consumption. It found consistent reductions in blood pressure, fasting glucose, and LDL cholesterol across all 17 studies. Not one study, 17. The fourth fat has been sitting on the shelf the entire time. Nobody told you to pick it up. The Sumerians pressed sesame oil in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley 5,000 years ago. The Egyptians stored olive oil and sesame oil in clay amphorae along the Nile. The ancient Israelites built an entire sacrificial system around the fat of the land. They set apart the finest for God and built their table from the rest. The Greeks spread olive cultivation to every coastline they touched, from Sicily to the Black Sea. The Romans built the largest fat distribution network the ancient world had ever seen, with production centers across Spain, Tunisia, and Greece supplying every province of the empire. The Byzantine Empire maintained olive oil production through 1,000 years of political collapse, foreign invasion, and plague. Medieval Christian monastic communities kept the olive press running when every other institution around them had collapsed. Every civilization that built something worth remembering cooked with the same 4 fats. Not because they read a study, because they paid attention to what the land was already producing and built their bodies around it. The fat stores the energy. The body is just the path. God's people never forgot. In 1911, one product introduced in Cincinnati, Ohio, decided you would never need to render tallow again. In 1913, 2.5 million cookbooks made sure that decision reached every church kitchen in America. In 1961, a dietary statement built on 6 cherry-picked countries told your grandparents to throw out the lard. In 1977, 7 words in one federal report erased 4,000 years of fat wisdom from the American table. In 1980, the first USDA dietary guidelines made it official. A committee with 95% industry ties told 220 million people that the fat God's people had used since Abraham was dangerous. But the olive tree does not care about committees. The suet does not care about quarterly earnings. The butter does not care about the McGovern report. And the sesame press does not care about the 1980 dietary guidelines. It nourished every civilization that built something worth remembering. It has always been pressed from the same fruit, rendered from the same animal, and clarified from the same cream. And it will be doing exactly that long after every hydrogenated shortening and refined seed oil ever manufactured has oxidized into nothing. God's people did not lose this knowledge. You were just never given it. Now you have it. Drop your state in the comments. Tell me what you cook with right now and what you spend on food every week. I want to map it, state by state. If your grandmother ever kept a jar of lard beside the stove, I want to hear about it. Same knowledge, different name. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe. When the next one is ready, you will be the first to know.